In this video, we are going to look at an example for simplifying an expression using the order of operations. And you'll notice we are simplifying an expression that contains decimal values. We have our list off to the side of our order of operations. Now, we like to use the word PEMDAS to help us remember the order of operations. But there's something important that we need to remember. Even though the word PEMDAS, P-E-M-D-A-S, has 6 letters, it doesn't necessarily mean there's 6 separate steps to the order of operations. So let's make sure we understand that there's really only 4 steps to the order of operations. The first step is parentheses. So you look for any parentheses or other grouping symbols and you perform the operations that are inside of those parentheses. The next step is exponents. So if you see any exponents, you will evaluate the power of whatever exponent you see. Then step 3 is multiplication and division together. And notice how we work multiplication and division from left to right. So you just look at your expression and you start from the left and you work your way to the right. Any multiplication and division, you do it in order from left to right. So there might be times where you do a divide step before a multiplication step, if the division symbol comes first in the expression as you're looking at it from left to right. And then the same thing goes for addition and subtraction for step 4. Any addition and subtraction you also perform in the order from left to right. So it's possible you might perform subtraction before addition if a subtraction sign comes first in the expression before an addition sign. Now, one thing I also want to point out, remember when you do the parentheses step, it means you're doing whatever is inside of the parentheses. So sometimes you might see parentheses, but if there's nothing to do inside of the parentheses, you move on to the next step. Because a lot of times parentheses can also mean multiplication if there's a number on the outside of the parentheses showing that you're supposed to multiply those two values together. Let's take a look at some of these instances that we will see in our expression. So step 1, as we said, is P for parentheses. Well, when I look at this expression, I see that there are 2 sets of parentheses. But when I look inside the parentheses, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to simplify. It's just the number negative 0.4 in each set of parentheses. So there's nothing to do for step 1. So I'm moving on to step 2, which is exponents. I do see an exponent. So that means I need to evaluate the power and I need to figure out what negative 0.4 to the second power is equivalent to. So I could also write negative 0.4 to the second power as negative 0.4 times itself. And then I'm going to continue with the rest of the expression. Minus 0.7 times negative 0.4, and then close that parenthesis, and then minus 0.4. So right now, I could think of this as multiplication, but I'm going to think of it as exponents since I'm squaring a number. This means I'm going to multiply negative 0.4 by itself. So first thing, I do know that since it's a negative times a negative, it's going to be a positive value. So I can just consider the product 0.4 times 0.4 because I know my answer is going to be positive. Now, when I look at 0.4 times 0.4, I notice that each number or each decimal has 1 decimal place. So if I add those 2 decimal places together, I get a total of 2 decimal places. So in total, my final answer should have 2 decimal places because each number had 1 decimal place and 1 plus 1 is 2. So it's kind of helpful to think about multiplication of decimals in this way because then you can just multiply the whole numbers. You could just think of this as 4 times 4, which is 16. But then just know that your number 16 needs to also have 2 decimal places. So in the number 16, the decimal point is implied at the end of the number, and we can walk it backwards 2 spaces because of the 2 decimal places that have to be in my final answer. So 0.4 times 0.4 is really 0.16. So it's the number 16 with 2 decimal places, and it's positive 0.16. Okay, now we're done with our exponent step. Let's write the rest of our problem. So we have 0.16 minus 0.7 times negative 0.4, end the parentheses, and then minus 0.4. So now let's look at the operations we have. We have a subtraction, we have another subtraction, but then we also have a multiplication. So where I see the 0.7 parentheses negative 0.4, that really means negative 0.7 times negative 0.4. So let's rewrite our expression. I have 0.16 minus 0.7 times negative 0.4 minus 0.4. Because again, sometimes people confuse the parentheses with multiplication and they think they should have done that first because it is P for parentheses, but actually that parenthesis, all that means is multiplication in this case because there was nothing to do inside of the parentheses. So now as I look at my operations, I have subtraction, multiplication, and subtraction. So clearly I want to do the multiplication first. So that's why I've put parentheses around the 0.7 times the negative 0.4. So I'm going to be subtracting the product of 0.7 times negative 0.4. So I'm multiplying a positive number times a negative, so I'm going to get a negative value. So I can just focus on 0.7 times 0.4, or think of that as the whole number 7 times 4, which is 28. But since 0.7 and 0.4 each have one decimal place, and 1 plus 1 is 2, I take the decimal point at the end of 28 and I walk it backwards 2 spaces for a result of 0.28. So now I have 0.16 minus negative 0.28 minus 0.4. So the reason why I have minus negative 0.28 is because when I did 0.7 times negative 0.4, that was a positive times a negative, it's a negative 0.28. But since I'm going to be subtracting a negative value, that will soon turn into addition. So I have 0.16 minus negative 0.28 minus 0.4. So since I'm subtracting a negative, this becomes 0.16 plus 0.28 minus 0.4. So now I have addition and subtraction, and I will perform those operations in order from left to right. So first I'm going to add 0.16 plus 0.28. And after I do the addition, that gives me 0.44. So I have 0.44 minus 0.4. Now for this subtraction, be careful to line up your place values appropriately. So 0.44 minus 0.4, notice the 4 is in the 10th spot, and I can fill in the 1 spot with a placeholder of 0 to keep my place values lined up vertically. So essentially I have 44 minus 40, which is 4, or in this case 0.04, because it was 44 minus 40, but in decimals, I have 0 now in the 10th spot and 4 in the 100th spot. So I have positive 0.44 minus 0.4 for a final result of positive 0.04. So now that you've watched this example on simplifying an expression with decimals using the order of operations, you are ready for the problem on the next slide. So now you're going to simplify the expression below using the order of operations, show all of your work on your paper. So you can pause the video right now and copy down this problem, show all of your work, and upload it in the week 6 overview assignment. Thank you. Have a great day.